Christian Parker finally spoke to the Dallas Cowboys media, and we'll give you all of the juicy takeaways next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. He is Landon McCool. And on today's show, we are discussing Christian Parker speaking to the Dallas Cowboys media for the first time at his press conference. We're going to talk about 3-4 versus 4-3. We're going to talk about the slot defender and the role in this defense. But before we get to all that, Landon, let's just general takeaways for the press conference. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a lot of what we expected. We had heard so much about him, like before we had this press conference and what he was like. And we obviously, some of us have seen videos of him, and kind of clips from the field as a coach. But, just very kind of calm, put together. I almost thought that he was nervous at first just because he was so kind of reserved. And I wasn't sure if that was the case. But as he started to kind of open up a little bit, I think he was trying to just get a feel of what the media was going to be like, which I think is absolutely fair in this situation. But no, I think he had answers. He didn't give away too much, I don't think. And I think, a lot of times with these press conferences, you're not getting a ton of they're very kind of rehearsed, and I think they have their talking points they want to say, and you don't necessarily get a ton out of it. But I think you got to see a little bit about who he was based on some of his answers. I think some of the questions about how does his political science degree kind of play into it. I think you got to see an opportunity to kind of show his knowledge about things outside of football. He just seems like a guy who's very put together, despite being very young, seems very mature in the sense that he's, straightforward, collected, understood exactly what he wanted to say and what he wanted to convey. Didn't struggle necessarily with the media, and felt, ultimately I reversed my course into thinking that he was nervous into, oh no, he's just very comfortable and very calm and just has a very even keel, which is probably exactly the kind of guy you want when things are going crazy, and you need your head coach, you need your defensive coordinator to be a calming voice.
We've covered enough of these press conferences now, whether it's head coaches or offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators, that I thought we honestly could have done this show without even watching the press conference.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you're right. It's the same things that are repeat. Oh, we're going to adapt.
We're going to be multiple
players. We're going to be multiple.
Like we're going to base our scheme on players, right? Like all these things, right? They just say them over and over again every time.
Yeah. So you can't read too much into that, because if you get too high on that kind of stuff, it's not great. But I think for what the part for me is, he just seems like there's a quiet confidence about Christian Parker that I think really attracted Brian Schottenheimer. And actually Schottenheimer talked about how they had 40 interviews they did this cycle. And Parker was the last interview that they did for the defensive coordinators. And he even admitted, like, they were really tired. They were dragging going into this interview, and they kind of left feeling more energized, because that's the kind of person Christian Parker is. It seems like he's a really infectious person, even without being this. It's weird because I don't think he's a high energy necessarily person, but I think he's so confident. It's hard not to get riled up when you listen to him.
Yeah, and I think he's passionate without being wild about it, which is it is a very interesting demeanor. Like, I will say that he has a very unique kind of way about him, and I don't mean that like he's Superman. I just mean like it's different. Like, I just don't think I've experienced that, because you're right. He's energizing without being overly energetic.
I think a good, compared to like Dan Quinn. Like, Dan Quinn is going to wear his heart and his emotions on his sleeve, right? And he's a very, I don't want to say rah in a bad way, but that's just the way Dan Quinn is. Christian Parker's very different in that way.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think they may be very similar in their press conference demeanor, right? Because Dan Quinn, despite being a wild man, kind of, when he's talking to guys and getting hyped up, kind of spoke with a soft undertone and spoke like this, and just very evenly, very confidently. And that's kind of what you got from Christian Parker a little bit, was just a guy that, like I said, was confident in getting these answers. And again, not necessarily going to be disrupted or have his day thrown off by these questions. Really good job of breaking down, complex kind of thoughts and into really kind of simple bite-sized manners. He understood what the assignment was when he was answering questions, and he did a good job. And I think that shows somebody who is clearly very, as he said, the way that you have confidence is to be well practiced and to be well prepared. I think he was very well prepared for this press conference.
We're going to talk about some of the specific things that he said in a little bit, but a couple other little takeaways. Number one, it's so obvious, at least to me, that Matt Eberflus was not a Brian Schottenheimer hire, even more so after this, because I was walking around the house holding the baby for a little bit, and I actually had it on mute, and just watching Brian Schottenheimer look at Christian Parker, and he was grabbing his shoulder. The way that he's looking at him is so different than the way that he ever talked about Matt Eberflus. And I know that's a wild takeaway to have, but you can tell Shotty is so fired up that he has his guy installed as a new defensive coordinator.
It's a real bromance going on there. And I agree.
It wasn't that way at all at any point last year.
I mean, I think this is a good opportunity for us to talk about, a little bit about the process. You and I were talking about all off season without confirmation until today that this process felt extremely similar to the process that the offense went through last season. And Schottenheimer confirmed it, that they wanted to use that same process that they did for hiring offensive coaches to build a defensive staff. And they had very similar results, it seems like. I mean, we'll see what the results are, but as far as what they ended up with, a mix of diverse young coaches who come from the pro and the college ranks, I think is kind of what they ended up on the defensive side. So I thought that was really interesting. I also thought it was interesting that he mentioned that Jerry was in every one of those 40 interviews. That was kind of wild to see. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people, I just want to throw this out just because we're talking about this real quick, but I think a lot of people kind of read into the fact that the Joneses weren't there for that meeting, but it does seem like that is kind of normal for these sort of coordinator hires after a head coach has already been hired. But I think that, again, more to the point of the fact that the Joneses were following the Schottenheimer's lead on how to execute and to follow the plan for hiring the staff. I think that speaks a lot to their trust in Schottenheimer, and frankly, a lot in their trust in Parker himself, because Parker is an extremely young defensive coordinator, and to turn this process over to a first year or now second year head coach and a very young defensive coordinator, maybe that shows a slight change in the Joneses' stance and how they're running the football team, or at least as it relates to the coaches.
Did you like the comment that he had about being young? He said, somebody asked him if his age is a concern, and he said, "Well, I've always been young, so I don't know." I thought that was funny. Also, Brian Schottenheimer had a little shot at Brad Sham, which was funny as well. It's just, again, you can't take too much away from these press conferences, but the mood and the energy felt so different than anything that they had at any point last year. And even when they hired Mike Zimmer, you and I were big fans of the Mike Zimmer hire. It's different. And I think it's a good different that they really needed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's time that they tried something new and different. Christian Parker feels new and different.
All right, let's talk about the 3-4 versus 4-3, because everybody is losing their minds about what this means for the Cowboys defense moving forward. I know people want to draft 315-pound 5 techniques back. We'll talk about nose tackles being back in vogue. We'll get to all of that next. This episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Welcome to the 5 Hour Energy Flavor Draft. We're looking at every aspect of the draft to let you know which tasty flavors are the best and which ones might be sleepers. The board is set, the flavors are ready, and only one is going to take the top spot. 5 Hour Energy has a wide variety of flavors, and they've got something for everyone. And 5 Hour Energy shots give you a boost with 0 sugar. I love all the flavors, but my favorite right now is probably the cotton candy. It's a very sweet flavor, but man, it just tastes so good. So find your new favorite flavor of 5 Hour Energy shots, available only at 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed sponsored jobs help you reach the right people who actually fit what you're looking for, who have the skills, experience, and location that you absolutely need. So you're not just hoping that the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here is a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement that it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. If you haven't checked out the Everydayer Club already, you should do so. Only $5 a month, and you're going to get ad-free episodes to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Just go to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, Landon, let's talk about 3-4 versus 4-3, because Christian Parker said it's going to be a base 3-4 with 4-3 spacing, and then on nickel situations, it's going to be a 4-2-5, and Cowboys Nation has no idea how to react. So can you try to break down what this means for Dallas's defense?
Yes, but let's first reframe the conversation, for God's sakes, okay? Like, first of all, 3-4 versus 4-3 is just a very outdated thought process here. When I think when people of a certain age, honestly, like anybody who remembers the old way that things were, I mean, when you say 3-4, it conjures the thoughts of two gapping, three sets of 310-pound, plus you got two guys on the outside that are on defensive ends that are five techniques that are, like you said, 315, 310 pounds, and then a 330-pound, Mogwally in the middle, right? Who's just eating up space. And what we should really be talking about is the technique, right? Is the two technique versus the two tech versus the one tech. I'm sorry, the two gap versus one gap. I'm going to make this more confusing. I'm sorry. Because two gapping versus one gapping is really where this conversation is it needs to be had. And frankly, it's neither of these that the Cowboys are going to use. They're going to use something called gap and a half. So two gap is what you would normally traditionally think is a 3-4, where you're locking up a guy. Your responsibility is either side of the person who's blocking you. So you're locking him up, you're separating, and you're waiting for the ball to come through a gap. Then you're shedding the block, and then you're getting the tackle, right? One gap is what we've been doing for the last few years, right? Where you're lining up in the gap, and then at the snap, you're getting through the gap, trying to get into the backfield and disrupt that way. Your only responsibility is the gap that you are going through. It allows you to play faster and get upfield. What Fangio and we are thinking that Christian Parker is likely going to deploy is a 3-4, which uses a gap and a half system here, mechanics. And I think that's more important really than how they're lining up, on first and second down, because again, they've even said they're going to be multiple. They're going to play 3-4. They're going to play 4-3. They're going to play 4-2-5 when they're in nickel, right? That's just like everybody else. What's different,
which is going to be 75% of the time, and we'll get back to that in a second.
Yeah, exactly. So none of it even matters really that much. But what's different is that now they have a primary and a secondary gap that they are responsible. They are going to line up in a gap just like they're in a one gap. At the snap of the ball, they're going to get into that gap. They're going to engage their blocker, and they are primarily responsible for the gap that they're in. They're going to peek. They're going to separate. So they're going to do some of the two gapping stuff, but they're going to do it while vertically displacing that blocker back into the backfield. And then if the ball goes to the backfield, goes to the backside of the play. Then they go into their secondary gap, and that's when they have responsibility for their secondary gap. But it still requires guys who are explosive up the field. It requires you to be strong as well. So that's why you see a lot of three techniques playing in this kind of set, which is, guess what, the Cowboys have a lot of.
And that was I was going to ask you
is,
does this defense set up well for the talent you have with Quinnen Williams, Osa, Kenny Clark, Solomon Thomas?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, if you were asking these guys to truly two gap, I wouldn't say so. Like Osa, especially, not necessarily a great fit for that. But I think for this, I do think that they are a good fit. I think all three of these guys can start in their spots right now. I think that there may be some times when they line up like a true nose, like, just because they are going to be doing a multiple front. And I think that's where, you worry about Kenny Clark maybe doing that for the long term over the season. But I think outside of that, when they're just lining up in a 3-4 and using gap and a half system, that really is going to play well to what these guys do. I mean, think about Quinnen Williams getting into a gap, engaging a blocker, and then just destroying him while covering two gaps. And it allows you to steal back a gap in run defense and play potentially with some lighter boxes, maybe play a little bit more nickel or play some interesting fronts where you're sending different guys. And, that's where it kind of really gets fun. Now you get to send more linebackers. You're going to have the kind of different pass rushers on the outside. We'll get into all of that, but that's really the kind of the true change that's going to happen in this defense.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Like, if you're talking about the four eyes, what that would be is like Quinnen Williams and, let's say it's Osa Odighizuwa, lining up on the inside shoulder of the offensive tackles, correct?
Yeah.
And then you would have what they would call a nose technique, and he can be a 1 depending on where he's shaded, lined up for the most part, head up on the center. And then in 4-2 situations, and then you have your edge guys that are usually playing at a 2-point stance, lined up way outside of the tackles. In a 4-2-5, you get your nickel, you're just taking the nose tackle off the field for a slot defender. Is that generally what they're going to run here?
Yeah, it's going to be, lots of tough fronts, lots of 404s, like what you described, where it's a 4-eye, a 0, a 4-eye, right? And then some G front stuff, like where they're going to, so you will see some 3 techniques. You will see some 2-eye stuff. But for the most part, like if you're talking about base, which is, again, another.
It's just like, it's like saying, they're going to run a pro style offense in the NFL.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that really mean anymore? We're running 11 personnel.
In that sense, like when they're in base or whatever, like, yeah, there'll be 3 down linemen, but not lined up necessarily like you're used to, right? Like, not, at least, if you watch a lot of college football, this is going to look very familiar. It's going to look almost kind of Saban-ish,
Yes.
A little bit of Georgia sort of, because they play a little bit of mint tight fronts, which looks similar a little bit. But yeah, it's very similar to that. It just allows you to do a lot more things.
So we're doing these bonus episodes, 10 minutes. They're always coming out the afternoon after the podcast releases. I want to talk a little bit on that show about how this might change the Cowboys draft philosophy. So take a listen to that. But I think people are just freaking out too much. Like Christian Parker said, they're going to be multiple. They're going to make sure that the defense fits well for Quinnen Williams and Osa Odighizuwa. I think he even mentioned Kenny Clark. I think it's safe to assume that he's going to be back. This is not the big change that it was when the Cowboys went from Mike Zimmer in 2005 and 2006 to Wade Phillips in 2007. It was Parcells, right? Oh, it was Parcells, who had them at one point into a 3-4, and then they were running a Parcells 3-4,
which is a true 3-4, right? A true 3-4.
A true 3-4. It's not going to be that kind of transition. So I think if you're concerned that there's going to be some big learning curve, I wouldn't, because they were running versions of this last year when they had the 5-man fronts.
See, think about what Stephen Jones said when, I can't even remember what it was, the owners meeting, or they just gave an interview and they talked about one of the benefits of hiring Christian Parker is that he had a plan for the personnel that we had. So and remember, again, I harped on this. The first 3 players that came out of Stephen Jones's mouth were Kenny Clark, Osa Odighizuwa, and Quinnen Williams. So they have a plan to play all 3 of these guys a lot.
Yes. Let's talk about the slot defender, because Christian Parker gave a really interesting answer about the role of a slot cornerback in their defense. We'll get to that next.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, The financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. The last thing I wanted to touch on here after listening to Christian Parker is how important the slot role is going to be for him. And he talked about all the different jobs you have to do. Again, it's nothing groundbreaking, but you can tell that's a really important role on their defense. And I wonder, just kind of listening to him describe that player, I feel pretty confident that that player is not on the roster right now.
I mean, that's certainly, yeah, I think that's probably true, right? I mean, I think that the slot position is an incredibly important position and have thought so for a while. And I think that, you know, it's important in every defense across the NFL. I think it is probably doubly as important, though, in these kind of defenses where you're going to play a lot of cover 6 and a lot of cover 8, right? And you're going to be doing a lot of quarter, half stuff, or, you know, and I think there just requires a lot of communication in those schemes. There's a lot of understanding the rules of how to pass off receivers based on, you know, which receiver is moving, you know, the wide receiver, when number 2 breaks inside, then you've got man everywhere he goes, and the outside corner has got to play, cover 1, right? It's like, they have all these kind of different variations of this. And so not only does the slot get asked to do a lot of physical, you know, varied things, a wide variety of tasks and assignments on any given play, but on top of that, they also have to be kind of a glue guy communicator between the second and the third levels of this defense in coverage. So it's an incredibly important position, probably just, you know, even heightened so in these kind of schemes.
And again, I don't want to get too heavy into draft stuff here, but just listening to him talk about the position, he said, you know, there's going to be a lot of times where that guy's going to have to be a linebacker or be lined up as a safety. And it just made me think of, like, what's the prototype that he wants here? Is it going to be, you know, a 5'11", 200-pound guy, kind of like what Philly had with Cooper DeJean? Or is he okay having it be an undersized guy? Like, I was watching D'Angelo Pons from Indiana tonight, who's 5'8", 175 pounds. I just wonder if he's going to want a bigger slot corner, and maybe I should even say corner, a bigger slot defender than what we're typically used to seeing.
Maybe a 6 foot, 195 pounds nickelback from the University of Miami with the last name Scott. Maybe you could, I mean, I'm not to get too specific, but
we want the cornerbacks around here. I mean,
whoa, watch it. We'll talk about that later. No, I think it's a good point. Like, I think we're moving away from the kind of more undersized water bug matching wide receiver lockdown, you know, nickel corners.
The Orlando Scandricks, right?
Yeah, exactly. To these guys that are a little bit more versatile, right? That they can do a little. And I don't think, you know, like, look, Nick Emanwari is kind of the toast of the day.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's not him, right?
That's an unrealistic expectation, right? Like, I mean, there's very few of those athletes that play, you know, that are available. So I think what you need is somebody that is probably closer to a cornerback size, like normal cornerback size, maybe not like super undersized, because again, they are going to have to hold up physically, but it's an attitude, right? It's a mentality, right? And I think that's the kind of important thing, is that, you know, Cooper DeJean, I mean, I hate him, he's an Eagle, but the guy is scrappy. I mean, like
Yes.
the guy plays like he's 6'3" and 250 pounds. And I think that's more what you need than anything. Think about, was it Antoine Winfield that was the old nickel corner
from Minnesota? Yeah.
From Minnesota back in the day. Like that's the kind of guy you need is, maybe he's just slightly undersized. Maybe he's only 5'11" or not quite 6 foot, but he plays like he's way bigger and he throws his body around and he's smart. Like that's the kind of guy that you're looking for.
I expect the Cowboys to really prioritize that position either in free agency or the draft. And I would be shocked if they came out of round 1 of the draft. I'm not saying they're going to draft one on round 1, but between free agency and the first round of the draft, if they didn't already have that player on the roster, because frankly, it's going to be impossible for this defense to work unless they have a really good one.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's such a key point. It's got such a key position, and it's a full-time starter at this point, So yeah. You need this player on your roster to make, especially these more complicated defenses work.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast so you get all of the latest episodes. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Cowboys ad-free plus members-only Discord access and so much more. Head over to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com to join the club. And for those of you on video, we can send you the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. And on audio, make your second listen to the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.